How many of you mothers got paid to raise your child? You do it for free, don't you? You do it all over again. A mother's love, it is a beautiful and wonderful thing. This morning, we're going to be considering Jochebed. And I'll tell you a little story here in a second about Jochebed and my lack of knowledge. But in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 24, we see that God has created man, and man is in the Garden of Eden. He's created all of the animals. He names all of the animals, and God says of the sun and the moon and the stars and of the ocean and of the land and of all things He created, it is good. But of man alone, He said, it is not good. So men, don't get too high-headed, because alone we are not good. God created a helper fit for Him. He created woman. And in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 24, we see that husband and wife are alluded to. Mother and father are alluded to. The very beginning of creation, husband, wife, and mother and father are a part of the plan of God. We're starting a series today on family. And I want us to understand that while marriage is a part of God's plan, so too is singleness. And we'll talk about that in a later day. God has plans for all people, be they married or not. But to be married and to have a child, I wish I could speak from experience here, but I understand it to be one of the greatest gifts that we could ever experience. To be a father, to be a mother. There's a special bond between a mother and her child. And so as a nation today, we are remembering mothers. We're considering mothers, and we're thankful for mothers. But I want us to not neglect or forget that in today's society, we have many who are struggling with fertility issues. We have many who are struggling to find a partner, a spouse. We have those who have lost a child in the womb. God has designed women to be of the nature to have children. And we remember those women, but we also need not neglect those who so desire to carry the title of mother. It's a precious and wonderful thing. Jochebed. Let's turn over to Exodus chapter 2. We're spending most of our time here as we think about the role of a mother in the life of a child, the role of a mother in the family, and what mothers bring to the table. In Exodus 1, starting in verse 15, it says, "The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live." You know, the Egyptians here, specifically the Pharaoh over Egypt, was concerned about the Hebrew people because they were numerous. In fact, in verses 8 and 9, it says, "There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, 'Behold, the people of Israel are too many, and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. I understand from a biblical standpoint why this occurred, but from a strategic standpoint of the Egyptians, it makes no sense to me why the Egyptians thought, these Israelites, they may help somebody else defeat us, so what we're going to do is be really, really, really mean to them. Why? Why not help them? Why not be with them? We don't know. But it certainly was to fulfill God's plan. They made the Israelites slaves. They caused their work to be heavy. They tried to kill their children, because it was the men who they were concerned about, to be of military advantage or might. It says the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. This is the backdrop to which we find Moses. The midwives were commanded by Pharaoh, who, in the eyes of the Egyptians, was God. He was the highest of deities in Egyptian culture. And so when he commanded something, it was to be done. Verse 17. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. Well, Pharaoh's not happy about that, so he calls the midwives. Why did you do this? Why have you not done what I commanded? And they say, because the Israelite women are not like the Egyptian women. You Egyptian women are weak. Us Israelite women are strong. Said they're vigorous. They give birth before the midwife comes. We didn't have a choice. We couldn't. We weren't there. Was that really the case? No. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. Let that be a lesson to us, to fear God more than we fear any government or authority that may be in place. God is first. Verse 20 says, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. And then Pharaoh did something else. He said, okay, if the midwives aren't going to kill the babies there, right from birth, then every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile. But you shall let every daughter live. Well, to some this may seem interesting. It may seem like a possibility of sparing the child. Well, for after all, Moses was tossed into the Nile, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter, and that worked out well for Moses. But the Nile was notorious for a couple of animals that you don't want as pets. The crocodile, and in particular, the Egyptian crocodile is one of the largest that exists in the world. That's one of the top 10 most dangerous animals to people. And then the other was the hippopotamus. Also one of the most top 10 dangerous animals to people. And so what was the purpose of casting the child into the Nile? Well, it was a death sentence. It was, if you're not going to kill the baby, we'll let nature take care of it. They're not going to live. It was a death sentence. I thought about many different women that I could have spoke about this morning. Thought about Hannah. Thought about Eve. Thought about Mary. The reason that I chose Jochebed actually stems from a Sunday night class we had a few months ago. We were talking about Moses and we were talking about the history behind it and the surrounding things that have occurred in history. And I said, we don't know Moses' mother's name. And within about 2 minutes, I had a screenshot from one of the ladies that showed the picture, the screenshot of Exodus chapter 6, where we have the name of Moses' mother mentioned. I stood corrected, quite literally. And after class, somebody came up and said, "Hey, did you know?" I said, yeah, I know. So I want to talk about Jochebed today. Because I think what Jochebed does in chapter 2 is so on par for what it is to be a mother. We know from Hebrews 11 that Jochebed and her husband, both Levites, by the way, there's no question as to what tribe Moses belonged to, but they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, which is why they hid Moses for 3 months. And so as we've seen the midwives fear God, we see as well that Jochebed fears God. And what I would submit to you this morning, as Christian mothers, your first responsibility is to fear the Lord. To put Him first, to put His commandments first. To trust in God. Chapter 2, verse 2. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. And we don't know exactly how difficult it was to hide this child. I've been around a few newborns, and I know that they're not always the quietest. It's a beautiful sound when you hear a baby crying, isn't it? At least in here, I find it to be beautiful. So it means we've got young children. And it means that our congregation is growing. But if you're trying to hide something, you guys have played hide and seek, right? When you went and hid while playing hide and seek, did you start singing a song? Did you start screaming and yelling? No, you were as quiet as you could be. Because you were hiding. You didn't want to be found. And generally speaking, you don't hide things that are acceptable to have. So there was a problem here with Jochebed having her son in the house. But for 3 months, she was able to hide him. For 3 months, she was able to spend time with her boy. And in her mind, she knows this can't last. Because if I'm found out, we will all likely die. Do you know how much she must have cherished those 3 months with that young boy? How closely and how tightly she must have held him and loved him. She knew she could not hide him any longer. Verse 3. So she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. Now bitumen, I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but it's essentially asphalt. Is what it is. And when it's heated really, really hot, it actually becomes a liquidy type of thing that gets really sticky. And what kind of bitumen was it? Well, it was bitumen with pitch, which was a tree resin. And it was meant to insulate and to keep things stable. This was something that they actually used quite often in ancient Egypt. They used it in the mummification process. The Nile River likely had many trees along its banks that they could have received this resin from. And so it wouldn't have been overly difficult, I don't surmise, for her to have acquired this and to have made this work. And she took it and she put it around the ark. Because the same word that is used for basket here is the same that is used for the ark in Genesis 7 through 9 with Noah. So if ever you've heard someone say Moses' ark, or maybe you've said Moses' ark, I've been guilty of that. You weren't technically wrong. Moses had an ark. It was a little smaller, but he had an ark. And what was the ark in Noah's account supposed to? It was to protect the animals. It was meant to keep them safe, to bring them to the other side whenever land appeared. Well, what was the purpose here of this basket? It was to protect her son. You see, Jochebed knew not only the fear of the Lord, but she understood the sanctity of life and how precious it is and how much we are to protect that which cannot protect itself. And so she sought to protect it. Again, the Nile was infamous for crocodiles and hippos. And this resin mixed with the bitumen, it would have actually warded off those animals. They wouldn't have enjoyed it. They wouldn't have liked it. And so she made this basket, and she put the child in the basket and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. What do you think it took for Jochebed to do that? If she was trusting in her own ability, she must have been hopeless. But she had faith in God. She trusted that God would provide for her child. Mothers today fear the Lord, value life, understand that it needs to be protected, and they place their faith not in themselves, but in God. Then we get to verse 4. It says, his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Moses had a mother, for sure, but he also had a sister who certainly served to some capacity as a motherly figure in his life. And as we find later, he has Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, to some degree, had three mothers that helped him, that taught him, that was with him. We know Miriam was with Moses all the way through into the Exodus. You don't have to be a mother blood to be a mother to somebody. Mothers are those that care for, provide for, lift up, and protect those around them. Miriam watches this basket float down the river, paying attention, watching her brother, looking over him. In 3 months, you know she's also grown to love this young boy. And all of a sudden, in verse 5, we see the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and while her young women walked beside the river. Well, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Do we know exactly why Pharaoh's daughter took pity on this child? No, we don't. But if you've ever seen a 3-month-old crying baby, you might have some idea. You want to nurture it. You want to protect it. You want to hold that baby because it's precious. Miriam, how brave. What a brave woman she is. As a slave, she goes and talks to Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, surrounded by her retinue of people, and talks to her likely would have been culturally inappropriate, possibly could have gotten her killed, and yet she said to Pharaoh, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said one word as far as we know. Go. That's good. Do that. Yes, I want that. And so Miriam went, and who did she get? But Jochebed. Jochebed, who had just placed her son in the river, likely thinking, I may never see him again. I don't know what's going to happen to him, but I'm putting my trust in the Lord, come what may. Is now called and is able then to wean and to raise her son. What type of rejoicing must she have been doing? How happy, how joyous must she have been? That's my son. I've protected him as best I could, and the Lord has brought him back to me. And so Jochebed takes the time that she has with him, and we know that she must have, to whatever degree is possible, taught him about God. There are a couple of scriptures that come to mind. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. These were all written well after Moses' time, but I think they so encapsulate what Moses must have remembered or felt during these times. It says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. You are to wear them. You are to be seen with them. For they are wonderful. They are good." I'm also reminded of 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. "I am reminded of your sincere faith," Paul says to Timothy, "of faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well." You know that Jochebed must have taken any opportunity she had to teach her son about God. And we don't know how long Moses was with his mother. We can at least surmise at the very minimum that he was weaned by her, so at the very least 3 to 5 years old. It's also possible that he was able to come back and visit his nursing mother, his actual mother. We don't know. We don't have that part of the story, but we do know that Moses knew and feared the Lord. And he would not have learned that from Pharaoh's daughter. And so that's a beautiful and wonderful thing to consider. And it's important that we understand that mothers bear, and fathers too, but mothers bear a responsibility to teach their children, to train them up in the ways of the Lord. And what a beautiful and wonderful responsibility it is. The last thing that we see Jochebed doing is something that is arguably the most difficult thing for any parent, especially for a mother, to do. Jochebed lets her child go, sends her child off to go and be with Pharaoh's daughter. Jochebed must have first had faith in God to be able to do this, but she also had to trust that what she had done in teaching her son, in raising him, was sufficient. That he would know right from wrong, that he would know what is good and what is evil, that he would know the Lord. Jochebed had to let her son go. And there comes a point in all children's lives where they become old enough, they become ready to leave the nest, to fly free. And what does a mother want to do? But hold on, to hold tight. That's my child, that's my baby, you can't go anywhere. And yet, they must. They must let go, for it is there that a child truly becomes a man, becomes a woman. And a mother has done her job. She has taught the child. She has loved the child. She has raised the child as best she can. And she does it certainly because she loves her children, but she does it because she loves God. Jochebed had to give away her son to somebody else. And Pharaoh's daughter became his mother. And in this society, in this day and age, likely provided Moses with things that Jochebed could not have provided. An education, quality shelter, quality food, all sorts of various things that would have been good for Moses. But even still, she had to give him up. And so we see in these 10 verses in Exodus chapter 2, the beauty and the difficulty of being a mother, of raising a child, of loving a child, of having to let that child go into the world knowing that you have done the best that you can. Mothers are a gift. I know that my mother is a gift. They bring a family together. A lot of times they're the spine of the family. They're the foundation of the family. They're strong. Stronger than they have any right to be, and yet they are. Today, as a nation, we recognize mothers, but Christians, every day, we ought to be recognizing our mothers, thanking them for what they have done, loving them for who they are, and for showing us the unconditional love that they have. And to the mothers out there, I leave you with this charge. First, fear the Lord. Be like Jochebed. Fear God. Fear God more than you fear anything else in this life. Respect Him and follow His commands. Protect your child from the evils of the world. Hide your child away as long as you can from the evils that exist in this world. Because there is evil in this world. Hide your child away. Protect that child. And when you can no longer protect your child from the evils in the world, equip your child with something that can defend against it. Just as Jochebed did here. She knew she couldn't protect him anymore. She knew she couldn't hide him anymore. And so she gave him a defense. She gave him something with which to fight back against. And teach your children. Let them know that you love them. Let them know that God loves them. Teach your children and teach them as often and for as long as you possibly can, because there comes a time when they won't listen anymore. That may not last forever. They may come back and say, Mom, I need help. But there will come a time where they don't listen. So teach them as often as you can. And then mothers, trust. Trust what you have done. Trust that you have done the best that you can do with the time that you have been given, and that you have taught your children right from wrong, and they know what is right and they know what is wrong. Trust in that. Because you have done it not just for you, you have done it for God. Love your children. Let them know above all that they are loved. And recognize that your kids will not always make the right decisions. And that's okay. They're not perfect. You may think they are. But even Moses made mistakes. Even Moses made mistakes. Love your children. Be understanding and have grace with them. and above all, love God. Mothers, we thank you. But we thank God for giving us mothers in his infinite wisdom of knowing that man alone is not good and that we needed women. We needed mothers. We needed the backbone of our family to be there. If there is any need you have this morning, if you are struggling with your faith, if you have not yet been baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, if you are struggling with life and need the prayers of this congregation, whatever it is that you may need, brother, now's the time. There's no better time than now. We ask that you come forward as we stand and sing.